Maybe you give another minute, Alexis.
Sure,
You
we
think?
can give one more moment. Welcome,
Yeah.
everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'll just give folks another moment to join from the waiting room and we'll get started.
So we've got AI and machine learning. We've got finance, monitoring impact and evaluation. Amazing. Product design, customer success. Oh, lots of varied people. This is fantastic. So once again, if you haven't got something in front of you to write with, a pen, a few pencils, a piece of paper, run and grab it now. We've got time. Um, Fantastic. And hopefully you can hear a few birds chirping in the background. The reason for that is I've lived away from New Zealand for 10 years now, and the thing I miss the most probably is the noise. There's very different noises where I live now. Okay. All right. Well, Alexis, what do you think? Is it time to get going?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay. Do you want to say any opening words, or shall I just jump on in?
I'll just pass it right over to you. We'll save more time for the meat of the matter.
Okay. Amazing. Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. My name is Begonia. You've said the same thing about the birds. Yes, I know. It's funny, isn't it? Well, the sounds in our new lives that we miss. So my name is Gabrielle Barron. My pronouns are she, her. I am the interim director of climate action at an organization called the Center for Public Impact. What we do is we take a systemic approach to solving social challenges. I can go on at length about what that means, but in short, instead of looking at things in a linear fashion, if we do this, we do this, we do this, which is the way that a lot of governments have been taught to think by a few different theories over the last maybe 50 years, we as an organization understand that everything is connected and that we are operating in systems that are connected. My team, the climate action team, focus mostly on urban and city environments. We decided that our entry point would be at accelerating urban climate action. And we do this through looking at transforming the way that organizations work, particularly de-siloing government, because everything is very much in silos at the moment. We do some quite interesting and fun work on climate finance, looking at how we can do that in a more systemic way, words like portfolio approaches that some of you might be familiar with. We look at how information is being used for climate. We're particularly interested in AI and how we're gathering data and using that to make climate decisions. And we're really interested in community government relations. And at the moment, what we're doing on that is some really interesting work around imagination and encouraging communities and governments to imagine climate secure and resilient futures together. So the reason that the session came about was one of the Terra colleagues got in touch with me and was like, oh, you didn't start off in climate. How did you end up here? And so I am going to spend the next, hopefully only 10 minutes, talking you through how I ended up where I am now. And then I'm going to show you a little map that I made of how I basically got the job that I've got now. This is my first climate only job. And then I'm going to suggest that we go through together and you can get a bit creative and create your own maps. And so this is going to be particularly useful if you are looking to transition into the climate space. You feel like you've got a lot of knowledge and transferable skills, but you haven't ever had a chance to sit and think about how they connect up together. I'm also hoping that we can have a little bit of, you can help each other a little bit and it will be a bit interactive. But at any point, please put your hand up, ask questions. I personally find it a little bit difficult to monitor the chat fully and be completely engaged in a Zoom room. So Alexis, I might ask you if you can keep an eye on the chat. Amazing, thank you. But otherwise, please just pop your hands up. I don't know if any of you are from New Zealand or know New Zealanders. We tend to be quite a casual people. So please feel free to just interrupt there. Any questions before we start? Any worries anyone's got? Okay, cool. So I want to just give you a little bit of a background. I don't have slides for this. You're just going to have to listen to me talk and see how we get on, because I thought slides about me is something that I'm not really the kind of person who's ever going to sit down and make. I've had a bit of a classic squiggly career. My main academic interest at university was power. I trained as a lawyer. And I realized that the law was not necessarily always about justice. It was about power and it was about money. So I went and worked in the Electoral Commission in New Zealand running elections, which was very, very interesting. And then through postgraduate studies, ended up somehow as a tax accountant, which I absolutely recommend. Anyone who has ever got a spare 6 months on their hands, go and learn how to do a spreadsheet and numbers, because it has served me well throughout my entire career. Our finance department, where I currently work, did actually offer me a job the other day. I don't think I'm particularly mathematically minded, but it was a very interesting piece of work. And the reason I wanted to do that was I was very interested in taxation as a form of control, as a form of transferring power, and as a way of deciding what is worth investing in from a public perspective and what isn't. We all pay our taxes. Our taxes all go towards incredible public services. And I was really interested to understand actually how that all worked. From there, I went back to my first love of elections and started working at the Commonwealth Secretariat. Now, the Commonwealth Secretariat, for those of you who don't know, it's a tiny little UN almost of Commonwealth countries. At the moment, there's 54 of them. A lot of them are former British colonies. I was in the electoral support team there. What that meant was we worked on capacity development, capability building around transparent, free and fair elections. And my particular focus was on gender inclusive and socially inclusive elections. So that's encouraging women to run for office, ensuring voting places are disability friendly, things like that. And a lot of my work took me to small island developing states. You might have heard this word SIDS. If you haven't, that's your initialism or your acronym for the day, SIDS, in the Caribbean. Now, this was where I really had that moment of like, I can see there is climate infringing on people's ability to live and thrive, because in a lot of these small island states, extreme weather patterns were really diminishing quality of life and dragging resources or taking resources away from other social initiatives, or unfortunately, inadequate resources were being allocated to those recoveries. And this is really the point where I was like, right, someone else can deal with climate. I'm busy with getting women into office and, you know, being a learning partner. So I'm going to give climate to someone else. And I really took that stance, was like, I recycle, I take the train, but climate is someone else's problem because it's just not my thing. And for the next probably 5 years of my career, I took that stance. It was, I'm interested, but climate is someone else's problem because I've got, you know, there's more than enough other issues to worry about. However, everywhere I turned, the impact of climate crisis kept rearing its head. So whether it was through elections and the use of public money, whether it was through housing and where people get to live and get to choose to live. After working at the Commonwealth, I joined a small pro bono legal charity. We were working on economic governance. So we would provide free legal advice to activists, community groups, mostly in the Global South, on economic justice issues. We had a team of volunteers throughout the world who would do that. And once again, I thought, right, I'm here for the human rights, for the accountability, for the free speech, for the public financial management, for transparency. Climate is someone else's problem. And once again, I was working with journalists who were reporting on pollution scandals and were at risk of being imprisoned because of that. And I was working on infrastructure projects that, for example, hydroelectric dams that were being funded by the World Bank, but which were forcibly shifting communities off their land. And I was looking at geothermal energy projects where communities got in touch with us because the government was forcibly acquiring their land. So once again, things that were under the guise of, this is renewable energy, this is good for the planet, was impacting the communities that I was interested in working with. So through that, I became an accidental expert in, well, not expert, but accidentally quite knowledgeable in renewable energy and community engagement, or often lack of engagement on community energy. But still, I maintained that climate was someone else's problem and this was just part of my job, and I would figure it out later on, and really continued to promote sort of the things that I was interested and passionate about: inclusivity, gender equity. From there, I got a job with the Australian government. I'm not Australian, but a good friend of mine had sort of seen this job setting up an inclusive infrastructure project in Southeast Asia and was like, right, you're the person for this job. And being there for a few years, Southeast Asia is one of the most climate vulnerable parts of the world, and every infrastructure conversation centers around environmental resilience. It's not just natural disasters. It's that it's a region of the earth that's getting too hot for a lot of people to live. You have to be factoring in cooling. Cooling systems are expensive. It changes your budgets. And that piece of my brain that thought someone else could do climate started to unravel a little bit, because I could kind of no longer turn away and go, right, this is somebody else's problem. And in particular, the impact of climate on women and girls was ever present and becoming bigger and bigger. After then being self-employed for a while and I think one of you was working on monitoring and evaluation, doing fair bits of that, and realizing again how that system just wasn't set up to factor in not only gender equity, but climate. I began reading a little bit about systems theory and systems change and Indigenous knowledge pathways. Now, being brought up in Aotearoa, New Zealand, I'm really fortunate that we have some grounding in Indigenous understanding in relationship to land, and have had my whole life. I don't know if any of you have seen the film Moana, but one way that I find, yeah, Liana, you're nodding your head. So those are the stories that we are brought up with in New Zealand, that we are part of this ecosystem and part of this land, and all of that knowledge sort of suddenly became top of mind. And this, I think the realization I had was a little bit that I can pretend that climate is a separate thing as much as I like, because it's so hard and it's so big and it's so scary, but it is impacting every piece of work that I do. And I've become accidentally quite knowledgeable in a few of these areas. And particularly if what drives me is the wish that women and girls live in a space where they can thrive, and that people of all genders and ethnicities and groups can sort of thrive in our environment. I can't ignore the role that climate is and the systemic way that these things all interact. So that's how I ended up coming to CPI. And I saw the job advertisement for CPI and did a bit of a classic, oh, I don't know if I've got enough climate skills for this job. And so I'm going to show you what I did to prep for that interview. I made this. Probably not the most typical way of interview prepping. I am certainly usually a bullet pointed list spreadsheet kind of person, having had a lot of experience in project management. But this was what I made. And this became my little guiding map. So I don't know what you can see on here, but I started around the edges of sort of writing just things that I knew. Things that I knew. I knew about social inclusion, that had been a big part of my work. I knew a bit about green energy from some of those projects that I'd talked about, hydroelectric, geothermal. I knew a lot down the bottom left-hand side about taxes. I knew about carbon taxes. I knew about different types of taxes. I knew about debt. If you go along to the bottom about the 6 o'clock position, I knew about debt sustainability. I didn't necessarily think of that obviously as connecting to climate. And I knew about infrastructure and about women and girls and how natural disasters were affecting them. And this is a completely unedited draft. This is now almost a year old, this document that I made, to just try to connect all those up so that when it came time for an interview for a climate specific position, I could front up and say, I can't calculate carbon. That's not my thing. But if you want to talk about climate and debt, if you want to talk about climate and women, if you want to talk about climate and transport, that's something that I can do. It also took a certain amount, I think, of, as many of you have probably experienced yourself, confidence to say, okay, I can actually move into this space and I have legitimacy in the space, and what I'm bringing from my previous work, mostly in the international development sector, is valuable in this space. But this helped me to feel that I had confidence about it and go, right, here are all the connections. So when someone says to me, oh, well, you've never had a climate job before, I can say, okay, no, but because of my work in accounting and taxation, I understand how carbon taxes work and I can interpret that for the good of this purpose. Or, oh, you've done a bit on infrastructure, but you're not an engineer. Okay, but I know how to advise a government on the things that they need to consider for socially inclusive and resilient infrastructure. So I would like to just pause there, partly because I've talked at you for a really long time now. And I would just like to pause and check if anyone has questions about the career things that I talked about so far, or questions about any of the chaos you see on that map before we get into doing our own maps.
I mean, we could have so many questions. I'm just gonna come out and say really transparently, I've only just started out, so I think I don't have any of that knowledge. I only have the skills that I bring from completely different jobs. So I think that's where I'm struggling to map them out. I can only say I've done all of these things, but I don't get how they translate to future work in a different sector.
Thanks, Luciana. Well, I think what we'll do is the next few steps hopefully would get you thinking, and then we can think about maybe what the connecting lines that you can go away and think about are as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions about how I ended up here or my work at the moment?
Hey Gabrielle, Jay here. Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. Really interesting. I'm super curious as to like what actually propelled you to apply for a role that you kind of felt, perhaps not super completely qualified for, and like how you actually got to, getting into that position.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think people on this call might also have other opinions. So if you have an experience as well of applying for a job you think you're maybe not qualified for, let me know. It was two things, Jay. I think one was being really upfront about what I could and couldn't provide to the organization. And I really went in with that straight away. It's like, I have these specific things that I do know, but if you are looking for someone who can, for example, talk about business decarbonization and supply chain decarbonization, that's not my thing. And to be honest, it may never be my thing because I'm not that sort of commercially minded. I think it was also a bit of boldness. I really trusted when the organization said that they were looking for people with different experience, that they had a climate team. And I'm lucky, my colleagues are, some of them have been in climate most of their careers, which is really valuable. But very few of them have worked in different types of economies and different types of financial situations. So I had a sense that I was bringing something a little bit different, and that while the job description was open enough that I could shoehorn examples into that. I think as well, Jay, I've changed jobs every 3 years or so. So I've done a lot of interviews. And I would really recommend interview practice is really underrated. People think they can just front up to an interview and suddenly be their best selves and dazzle. I even for this job in particular, because I was a little bit underconfident, I made friends, and like my long-suffering best friend that I live with interview me so I could practice my answers and practice that explanation. So I could bring people along, even if they look at my CV and go, okay, we can see kind of how you connect. I practiced like drawing the lines for them and going, okay, I've done work on social inclusive infrastructure, which means I've done work on hydroelectric dams and how they impact communities, which means I understand the planning process for hydroelectricity and how, do you see what I mean? Like taking the time to connect the dots for people. Yeah, I would say those things. Has anyone else had this experience of applying for something that they didn't quite feel necessarily qualified for and would like to share something that helped them?
I mean, I guess just to not that helped me, right? But I had an interview last week where I thought I'd prepared well, and then the COO of this company threw a case study at me without any introduction, and it really threw me, right? So I think the idea of actually prepping and just asking for help from friends, housemates, whatever, family makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Chris. And it's the worst feeling when you think you've got it and then it's harder. Yeah, I've had my fair share of those as well. It's crushing. The job hunt can be really challenging in that way. And if it helps as well, I mean, for this job at the Centre for Public Impact, it was 3 1-hour interviews. So it was certainly not an easy process. They really mean business, but we're really lucky we work with, I think part of it as well is they're very keen that we're working with values aligned colleagues. Yeah, Carrie, go for it.
Yeah, I want to say, I think a lot of companies don't actually know what they want. And I think it's really frustrating as a job seeker. I remember I had my family say, they looked at the job description. They said, "Can't even apply for that. You haven't got that." I said, "But they don't need it." And they said, "Say they don't need it." I said, "Because I understand what they want." And I did get the job. And if I'd listened to half the people, they would have said, "Don't apply." And so it's really, what's really frustrating, and I think it's even worse now in green jobs, because people don't know what they want. They're scared about getting the wrong person. They don't know how to manage it, so they want somebody else to manage it for them. And so you've got all these uncertainties that they're trying to cope with, and that they're putting on a job description that's as long as your arm, that no one's going to have ever.
That's a good point, Carrie. That was certainly my feedback with the Centre for Public Impact. The job description was 6 pages long. And I said, I'm not sure I don't think anyone can do all of these 150 things. So
Unless it's an AI robot. Is that what you want?
exactly. Juana Maria, I can see your hands up.
Thank you so much for sharing everything with us. I just wanted to compliment that I agree with you that connecting the dots is the most important part. It hasn't worked entirely for me because I'm still looking for a job, but I have a similar experience as you, like mostly the same. I'm a lawyer, but I used to work in the government, and now I'm trying to pivot my career into business and climate. I just graduated from my MBA, but what had helped me, well, the most difficult part is to achieve that interview, no? As someone was explaining before, but once you do, the most important thing, as you explained it, is to connect the dots and explain to them why your skills are transferable, even though you have done exactly the same thing. So just wanted to compliment you, and thank you again.
You're so welcome. I know you're absolutely right. And I would say family and friends can be a wonderful, as Chris said, can be a wonderful asset for that. Certainly if you surround yourself with people who are as sometimes brutally honest as I do, then they will tell you when your cover letter is terrible. And also people who are outside the climate space can be very useful, because they will read it and go, I'm sorry, this jargon doesn't make sense to me. You have to play it out. Okay, any final questions before we move on to thinking about our mapping exercises?
Gabriel, there's a question in the chat, Gabriel. It says, how important was previous exposure to climate-related topics to your transition into your current role?
I mean, I don't think I would have gotten it if it hadn't been for that, because I was quite fortunate to come in to a climate-specific role at the same, well, you know, at the same level I had been at in more of a gender and social inclusion programmatic strategy role. I think what was important, though, was taking the lessons from those things, because I think sometimes we are so busy being caught up in the work, we don't see the climate angle, or we don't capture the lessons from the climate angle. And so something actually that I'm doing with the people I manage at the moment is we are already doing a little bit of next job prep. Not that they will need a new job anytime soon. There is more, you know, we are as a team, we are safe, which for a nonprofit is not always the case. But going, okay, when you have your next job interview and they ask you, what have you done on community resilience, or when have you interacted with senior stakeholders on climate? Banking those examples as they happen is really valuable, because it's really hard when you suddenly go in for a job interview, or you're prepping for a job interview, to cycle back through 5, 10, 15 years of your career and try and find those instances. So even if you think that your transition into a specific climate job is a few years away, or even 6 months away, to start banking those experiences now, and also starting to see, is there a space where you could be applying something you've learned to a climate opportunity? So I think, well, I hope that answers that question. I think without the peripheral climate experience, no, I wouldn't have the job I have now. But what I managed to do was take the lessons from those glimpses of climate as they got more, although those glimpses became more and more a part of my work life, and capture them at the time so that I could use them later, not only to reflect and refine what I'd learned, but to demonstrate to colleagues and client partners that I work with now that I have some experience and legitimacy and knowledge in the space.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Gabrielle, thank you. What was your onboarding experience like? Was there any training waiting for you to fill in the gaps?
No, there wasn't. Liana, but it's a good question. And one of the reasons I applied, so I was self-employed before I applied to this role. I wasn't desperate for work, but I wanted to get out of the kind of linear thinking of development, the industry I was in. And I wanted to get into climate. And one of the things that appealed to me is we are given a small discretionary professional development budget, and people have used that. So a colleague of mine, people have used that for all sorts of different things. Some of them have done really technical climate courses. I myself have done a little bit more of the systems thinking for climate action, because that's sort of an area that I'm not well versed in. But also I think in my team, there's a real appreciation that we're all bringing different lenses and different angles, and a diverse team is absolutely essential for climate action, I believe. If we're all thinking of the same solutions and all spouting the same ideas, well, I think we maybe get stuck on one path. I think part of the long interview process that I went through as well, there was a fair bit of testing of climate knowledge, but testing of climate knowledge from your own experience. They asked me questions like, in your opinion, what is the greatest hurdle to effective climate finance? It was a lot of speak from your experience and knowledge, which I think was also really effective for ensuring that you haven't got carbon copies of experience across the team. You have got variety. Yeah. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to reshare my screen, and this is now a time where we can get a little bit crafty. So moving on from here, oh, hang on, why is it not switching over? How to make your own map. So really, any way you like, and if you just want to spend the next 20 minutes doodling and creating something, please go for it. The way that I would suggest, if you would like a little bit of structure, is get your piece of paper, and on the edges, around the edges, start with all the topic areas, themes, things you know about. So I know we've got people who are involved in marketing on this call. What are the different parts of marketing? Perhaps it's, client relationship, it's design and development, it's data and information, it's break out the things that you know and pop those around the edge. And you can see in the picture that I just drew a few hours ago, things I know from work, just jot those around the top. Right? And around the sides. Think about things you know from other parts of your life experience. For example, as I mentioned, I have a real particular interest in Indigenous ecosystem management, and have done a fair bit of reading about that. So I would include that there. Perhaps other parts of your life, or you studied something completely different to what you're doing now, but you still have some knowledge and interest in that. Perhaps you're part of a community volunteering group. I was speaking to someone who is deeply involved in their community garden. And they started that just as a way to spend time outdoors. For those of you who know, in London, there are quite a few community gardens hidden around. And we got onto a conversation. I said, has it made you think about your local food system? And they were like, yeah, it has. They'd learned a lot about how food is locally grown and used. So add those, start with popping those around the outside. And then what I would suggest is in the middle, any climate things that you know. Any climate things that you know at all, whether it's literally just, I know about recycling, or I know about how local food is grown, or I know about internal sustainability in an organization, or I have a solar panel on my roof and I'm interested in that, or I drive an electric car, or anything, pop those in the middle. See how you can connect these up to what you know. We don't just know things. They don't just arrive in our brains one day. We know them through experience. We know them through doing. We know them through listening. Connect those up to your work and your life experiences, and then add more. And you might see that little themes emerge. For example, a theme that really emerged when I was doing mine was actually just how much I knew about what is called climate finance. Climate finance is just how are we funding what it is that we're trying to do in the climate space. But that's kind of the buzzword there. So again, when I was telling that story, I could announce kind of, well, I've got experience in climate finance because through this work, and this work, I know about this thing, and this thing. So see if there's any groups that emerge there. And also, don't be this doesn't have to be perfect. This is just for you. So make as much of a mess as you like and draw what you like. And if you're struggling to connect things up, that's okay. Add doodles, add words, whatever will help you make connections. So the next slide is If you are feeling like, oh, I don't really, I think I can't recall who mentioned it before, but felt that they didn't have the experience to connect those lines up, those dots up. If you're feeling stuck about your climate connections, think about any instances of working or volunteering or being around business sustainability. So a lot of people who are in the corporate space now, you may have a little bit of experience in this. Anything about green options, energy use, energy sources, any of that kind of buzz language that this corporate space is interested in. Thinking about transport. Is it public transport? How do you use transport? What do you know about transport, and how has that affected how you do your work? Maybe in your job, you have involvement in buying things. Anyone who has any choice in procurement, there is a climate angle to procurement. Anything that we buy, we have choices around whether we buy things that are more or less carbon intensive and use different kinds of suppliers. Have a think, are there any environmental considerations that are used when you're buying things? The example I gave there about volunteering at a community garden, is there anything in your work or life that's made you think about food or food systems, or I mean, food is something we all interact with. I think there are some of you working in financial services. Have a think. Is there anything about divesting from fossil fuels, about how pensions are being managed, that you have experience and skill and understanding in that we can connect to climate? Do you understand how debt works at a global scale? A lot of people don't. It's pretty valuable information. Are you in engineering? And that can be physical, infrastructural, or technological engineering, and AI, data, information use. These all can connect to how we come up with solutions for the climate crisis, how we develop physical infrastructure and social infrastructure for the climate crisis that is resilient. But also, a big topic in AI at the moment is the energy use of AI. AI is incredibly energy intensive. Is that something you know a little bit about? Do you work with a specific demographic? Do you work with young people? Climate anxiety is an increasing challenge for young people, understandably, and political frustrations around that. Do you work with, as I said, a lot of my previous work was working with women and the different way that climate impacts them. For example, how is public transport impacts women in different ways. When there are natural disasters, women are a more vulnerable group to domestic violence. Think about if you work in education, skills, future of work, how are we changing perhaps the curriculum or what we offer? I mean, even the fact that Terra exists is a response to this point. And then have a think about what else. There's kind of no wrong answers on this one. So what I'd like to propose is I'm going to put some chilled out music on, and we just spend the next 15 minutes doodling away, but chime in if you've got questions. So pop your hand up, pop them in the chat, let me know. There's a lot of people on this call, so we may as well use our collective mindset. Any questions before you set off on your doodling mapping journey? No? Okay. Amazing. All right, I tell you what, I'll keep that screen up, I think. Oh, there's something in the chat here. Dum, dum, dum. Oh, no worries. I'll put that back up. So Guillaume's just put a message in the chat which says, I see that you were clear about what you were looking for when you did your map. However, I have the impression that it is a good technique to define what you could be looking for or contributing to. Guillaume, I think that's a really good point. But I'm hoping that what we can start with today is to just get you thinking, and then perhaps when the time comes, you can take that section of your map and build it out a little bit more. But yes, it certainly did help that I could target things a little bit. But still, this is very much a brain dump, as I would call it, of everything I knew, and then I went through and kind of picked off the examples that I was going to use in the job search. I think we'll just do another 2 minutes, and then we can come back together as a group and people can share questions or anything that they learned about. And then a little bit of planning. All right, everyone. If we come back together, there's been a really great question in the chat that I think we might start with. And then I would love to hear what other people's questions are or any reflections on how you found that process and whether it worked. It was the first time for me of sharing my odd little process with other people. So really interested to know if it's useful. But Martina has a wonderful question in the chat. She said, how do you define knowing about something? I struggle with the extent of knowledge and, more importantly, experience I must have in order to say that I know about something. Convincing someone that a course on a particular topic is sufficient to do work in the topic is a challenge. Martina, if you're on the line still, do you want to give a more specific example of where this is becoming a struggle for you?
Hi, Gabrielle. Hi, everyone. So it's a struggle for me in a few instances. I've taken the past year to really do a lot of upskilling in different areas related to climate and sustainability in general. Taking courses in, for example, circular economy and decarbonization, and sending out resumes and either hearing nothing back or just getting the old, yeah, your background is not relevant for the role that we're looking for. And so it appears to me that it's the practical experience that I'm missing, and I'm not going to get that unless I have somebody who gives a chance to me. The chicken and egg thing, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, Martina, that's a really good question. Knowledge, I mean, we need a whole other session, Martina, to discuss what actually is knowledge and who gets the privilege of knowing things. Because I think something that we see a lot in the climate space is that marginalized communities' knowledge about climate and about land and about the environment is disregarded in favor of sort of colonial and post-colonial science. And those definitely have a role, and we are very lucky to have it, but all types of knowledge, whether it's from 10,000 years ago or 10 minutes ago, scientific breakthroughs are valuable. So that's how do we define knowing about something? But you raised a really good point, Martina, is just having knowledge enough? And if people aren't responding to that, how can we frame what we know and tie it to some kind of experience? Does anyone in the group have a helpful response to this? Because I don't know if I do. I think the the formal study that I've taken has often not been super applicable to my work. So yeah, yeah, Luis, Philippe, please chime in here.
Hi, no, I hope it's helpful, right? I know, I don't know what I'm gonna say, it's gonna be helpful or not. But I think like when you think about it, when you're applying for these jobs, you're asking for all these kinds of specialized knowledge, and then you get to the job and then you're not really applying all of these kinds of specialized knowledge, but you're using very specific things, right? And then you kind of learn as you go. So I mean, you don't really have to know everything, you know, and it's impossible to know everything, and you should, and that's something that you should know as well. So I guess what you have to do is, you have to be confident about what you do know, and I guess communicate what you can bring to the table. I guess maybe that some other people can't. And a lot of the thing is learning on the job as well, you know, and learning specifically what you will be working on. Yeah, that's my advice. I hope it helps.
Thank you. I think that's a good point. Can you connect the professional experience that you do have with your new knowledge to propose a sort of an even greater than the sum of their parts, and how is that being communicated through your resume or cover letters? And there's another hand up. Huda, is that, I may not be saying that correctly.
Yeah, no, that's right. No, I just wanted to say maybe instead of the word experience, I would try to use the word perspective. So I would say I've done, even if it's a course or like a capacity development sort of thing, I know those capacity developments are for professionals, but I, for example, work very much in the technical banking side of climate. But then if I do capacity training with organizations like UN, for example, I feel like if I were to go and talk to those vulnerable communities, you don't want to come in as someone who knows all the numbers and, you know, disregards everything. So you can just say, I can provide perspective on some of the legal framework or some of the institutional challenges, instead of saying I have experience in that. So I think that change of word is something I try. I don't know if it works, but I try to use that word more than experience.
That's a really good point. And how we communicate is really important. Liana.
Yes, thank you. Martina, I'm sure that you know so much, and I think a good exercise can be to synthesize, condense, find the pearl in your knowledge. Like earlier, Gabrielle was talking about her interview, where one of the questions was, Gabrielle, tell me how finance can work better for climate. And if you think about these kind of questions, if someone asked you, what would be your elevator pitch? So you have all this knowledge. If you condense it and crystallize it into something you can communicate quickly and efficiently, I think that might be something that could open doors for you.
That's really good. Alessia, please jump in.
Hi, I've been in a similar position. It depends, Martina, whether you are completely changing and whether you don't, whether you're invited to be able to speak orally, or you just get rejected because of your kind of resume that looks very differently. On the previous call in this climate week, there was a suggestion: if you pivot, it's unlikely, based from the experience for many people who were on the call, it's unlikely that you will be able to get by sending your application. So a much better way is to actually explain what you know by having that exposure to the person, which is a different path, which is a much longer way, and then creating the connection to be able to explain. But also a separate point, I've also kind of gone on different courses, including circular economy, and what I find, I still have to go and volunteer. This way, for some reason, people see you a bit differently, which means, yeah, you have to do a lot of volunteering free time. And I just, again, now, so I'm getting into the council kind of area. So again, going out and volunteering and connecting with people, but hope that it will lead to more meaningful relationships, and then that I will be able to show my skills.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much all for just coming in and support. That's really lovely. So what I would like to know is, in that exercise, are there any questions, or did anyone make a connection that they hadn't thought about previously, or were able to find something like this? Okay. Too short. You needed more time. Well, this is wonderful. Then hopefully you can take this away in your own time. And yes, this is absolutely meant to be just the start. And to kind of get you thinking. So I've just got a few more slides that I wanted to share. They're not too long. I just want to share some final thoughts with you about this process. So if you found it hard to make clear climate connections, and I know some of you may have had that experience, investigate what that missing step is and whether you need to do some kind of professional development, some kind of volunteer initiative, and this could be at work or elsewhere, or your own reading to fill that gap. So reflect on that a little bit and see, right, where are those lines stopping and what might be the next step into a climate thing. And I would say, don't forget to focus not only on your knowledge, on your perspectives and your experiences, but on the people, connections, and relationships that will enable you to learn and grow and create meaningful change. I think that's come up a little bit in the group suggestions here, that investing the time when you're making a change to communicate in person or online, of course, with people to get there, to be able to tell your story, but also to bring people along with you. And to think about who you might be able to build experience and knowledge with. Something that I've been really struck by in the organization I work in now is that there is the emphasis on relationships, and climate is certainly a relational space. We cannot do any of this on our own. And I just wanted to share with you all a final quote. This book, if you've not read it, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge and the Teaching of Plants, is a wonderful read. Hopefully some of you will have time coming up over the December holiday period. If you need to escape from your family and loved ones for a moment, please get this book, go to a nice cozy corner. And I think about this quote a lot on my hard days. Climate is not always fun. Working in climate, it can be hard. But this, she says here, even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. And so I hope to send you out into the world with your maps, with some new thoughts, and hopefully with a little bit of joy and fun, and you drew some diagrams or added some glitter or something to your map, because working in the climate space is an incredible privilege, and it is a joy, even on days when it's really hard. But before we close off, we've got another sort of minute. So if anyone's got any other questions, feel free to chime in now.
I'm really curious about what you've created, and I wonder how we can find a space where we could share, if we want to, the maps that we made.
That's a good point, Leanna. Alexis, I kind of turn that to you. Where can people share the beautiful things that they've made?
That is a great question. Yeah, we should figure that out. I know we're sharing all the recordings, so we've built a website for Europe Climate Week, and I wonder if folks wanted, if we could put a space together for sharing climate maps. I'll put my contact information in the chat, and I can follow up with our community team who has been kind of spearheading this whole week's event. But yeah, if that's something that you'd like to do, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll do a little investigating and I can get back to you.
I think that would be amazing. It would be super fun. All right, well, we're at time. Final question. We've got space for one more question if someone has one. Okay. All right, Alexis, anything you need to say from your end, from the official business end?
No, just a big thank you to everyone who attended. This was a fantastic workshop. I really enjoyed it. I hope all of you did too. And you know, we have more events. There's more events today. There's more events the rest of the week. Feel free to pop onto our website or to the Europe Climate Week website and check out some other things that we have coming up. We'd love to see you all again.
Thanks so much, Alexis. And thanks so much for having me, Alexis. It was a lot of fun. And thank you all for joining in and thanks for your collective spirit. I really appreciate that. All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Gabrielle.
Bye.